Hey there and welcome to our new podcast. I'm Marcus, this is Henry, and collectively we are Out the Boot. Henry, why are we here?
So we're here to learn about the media and arts industry. As media professionals, well, we say we're media professionals, but we cover a very small area, small aspect of the media industry. There's a lot to it that we don't know. And the point of this podcast is so that we can learn more about the industry we're in.
I think a lot of it stems from how we introduce ourselves. So when you introduce yourself to people, what would you say?
So here's the thing. So I often say I'm a filmmaker, but then I get follow-up questions of, oh, have I seen something you have made? What have you made before? And people generally jump to the assumption at the title of filmmaker that you make films for cinema, you make films for the big screen. And then I have to sort of explain to them, well, no, not really. I have made a feature film. We've made a feature film, Ambitious 220, but I haven't made anything that's been sort of gone out worldwide in cinema. I'd like to make a documentary or something like that goes out like that. Ambitious got a bit of a reach, but it wasn't it was a bit of a worldwide reach, but it wasn't like a mass publishing. So actually, when it boils down to what I do, it's sort of video production, it's sort of photo production, it's sort of videographer, video producer, director, content producer. Most of the work I do goes out on social media or goes out on YouTube. So I like to call myself a filmmaker, but at the end of the day, I'm producing content for socials, I'm producing social content. So it's a tricky question to answer. But yeah, usually if I'm talking about something that's like a passion project, something that I'm making for the purpose of making that film, I'll call myself a filmmaker. If I'm working for a client or I'm working sort of on something that's going out socials, I might call myself a content producer, I might call myself a videographer. If it's events, generally I'll say videographer. If I'm going to a client as sort of the one person who's going to be producing the content, I'll sometimes say content producer. But Marcus, how about you?
So the thing is, I'm a freelance filmmaker. That's what I would describe myself as. And often that isn't what I tell people. It depends on the job. If I'm, being booked to shoot photos for a product launch or something like that, then obviously I say I'm a photographer. A lot of the content I do, again, it is content. Most of my work ends up on social media. I think the ambition for myself and a lot of others in the industry is to work in film, those that don't. But I am a self-shooting, self-editing videographer. But I call myself a filmmaker because, well, to be honest, it sounds a bit better. There is some credibility, the two of us have collectively produced a film. I mean, it's only technically a feature-length film by, I think, 3 minutes. What defines a feature-length film is 45 minutes. I mean, well, it depends on who you're asking, to be honest.
It's debatable, but
it is, yeah. But
we say 45 minutes.
As far as IMDb goes, and the Academy, 45 minutes. But that doesn't always make sense to people when people ask you on the street or in a bar or in a coffee shop, what do you do? Because it does make it sound like you do, like a lot more than you actually do. I suppose it's a weird way of saying it, but yeah, most of my work, yeah, you won't have seen, of course you won't have seen it. I've not worked on, I don't know, The Gentleman or, I don't know, what's new, like the Wolverine, Deadpool, things like that. I've not worked on any of those things. Where my partner, on the other hand, has worked within the visual effects industry and has credits on films like that. I could only aspire to do that one day. But at the moment, like many others, I produce social media content. And filmmaker, I just feel it gives an essence, a kind of respect to what it is. So we work with cameras that are used in film production. The creator was shot on cameras very similar to what we use for this podcast. So I guess it's like a respect for yourself and your craft. And whenever I go to a client, whatever I'm shooting, I want to give it the respect it deserves. I want to give it the quality it deserves. Content you can film on a phone, to be quite honest. It's all about just the views and the engagement, but I want to make content that moves people. I want to make films. you know. And even though at the moment what pays the bills as a freelancer is content for social media, you can still give it the respect it deserves. You know, you can still move people with it, and that's why I call myself a filmmaker.
And to be honest, I think I call myself a filmmaker when I want to sound cool.
Yeah.
If I'm in a room of people and I'm like, I don't want to walk in and say, oh, I'm a videographer, or oh, I'm a video producer. I want to sound cool to a group of people. I say, yeah, I'm a filmmaker. Yeah, I primarily make documentaries, but yeah, I'm a filmmaker. I think it sounds cooler. But yeah, let's get started. So Marcus, what do you do? Who is M. Brooks Films?
So M. Brooks Films is just a name that I use when trading. So I'm actually a self-employed. I'm, you know, kind of a sole trader in that sense. I'm freelance. I don't have a limited company or anything like that, but I trade as M. Brooks Films. The goal at the moment is, I mean, I think, like, you know, we alluded to earlier, the goal is to be producing my own films. You know, that's kind of the height of where I believe I want to be. But at the moment, I just do it on a you know, personal capacity. I might have 2 or 3 people that I hire in to help me if it's a particularly big shoot. But for the most part, I'm a self-shooting, self-editing videographer or photographer, depending on the shoot. But I call myself a freelance filmmaker. And the kind of work that I do, it could be, a lot of it is in the fashion industry, which, you know, I don't know how that's happened because I'm not particularly fashion conscious, but I work a lot in textile manufacturing as well, so a lot of machinery. A lot of the work I do also stems around sustainability and conferences and things like that. And yeah, you know, some of that stuff you could argue is potentially a bit corporate, a bit, you know, boring in a sense, but there are stories there. And every now and then I do get a project where you do get a really good interview or a good glimpse into someone's life. I mean, what's a project that you've worked on recently where it's just it's a role that happens all over the country, but it's something that no one really considers or thinks about? You know, have you got an example of something you've done recently?
Yeah, so for example, I'm working on a film at the moment about church bell ringers, which is, it's something that I've always found interesting. I've seen lots of churches around the country, and it's always, I've lived in villages and I've enjoyed hearing the sound of church bells. But you don't really think about what goes into church bell ringing.
And you don't really consider it. I mean, yeah, I'm driving through different towns around the UK when I'm working. If it happens to be a certain time of day or on the hour or at the weekend, you're going to hear church bells. It's quite likely you're going to hear church bells.
So thankfully, it's a passion project. So I'm not working for a client as such. And it means I can dedicate some time and some focus to the story.
So did you ever think you'd be... I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about, actually. Because I guess the world of freelance for what we do at the moment, you don't really know what's around the corner. I mean, you do because, you know, things get booked in, but a lot of my work comes in a week within the day of shooting. So did you ever think when you started this journey, you'd be making short films about people who ring church bells and things like that?
So not really. So I'm a little bit the same as Marcos. I'm a self-shooting video producer, filmmaker. We'll go back to that discussion. Trading under the name Dim Dog Productions. I've been trading under Dim Dog Productions for years now. I used to be Dim Dog Productions Limited. I'm also sort of the same as Marcus, that I've fallen into working in an industry. Now, Marcus, I mean, you're fashionable sometimes, but working in fashion is a bit bizarre. It's strange that you've fallen into working in fashion.
I think it stems from just being lucky and finding a really, really good client who really likes what you do. I mean, obviously you've got to work hard. You've got to do work that pleases them so that they book you for the next one. You're only as good as your last job in that sense. But then a really good client will recommend you to their partners and their colleagues and their friends. And then you end up realizing, hang on, you've actually got a decent foot or the beginnings of a foot in a little corner, a little market, a little niche, you know.
So I've also sort of fallen into a bit of a niche. I've fallen into sport. I was never particularly sporty as a child. I didn't play football. I played tennis for a little bit. I cycled a little bit. I can't run to save my life, but I've ended up making loads of films or loads of videos and content about sport, whether that's in football, in cycling, in cricket. It's a strange thing for me, and what it has resulted in is I've managed to film and produce films about some amazing stories, some amazing athletes. And I think that's another thing about athletes and just finding interesting stories, that athletes who dedicate their life to their craft, just as us as filmmakers dedicate our life to our craft. Athletes are really passionate, and when they're telling the story, they're really passionate, and you come across some incredible people that way.
Yeah.
So Marcus, let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into the media industry?
I think, to be honest, well, how I got into the media industry was probably the day that I got my first actual job making videos. But I've been making videos for quite a long time. You know, like a lot of people, just, you know, bits of YouTube and, you know, things like that is how a lot of people started. I know a lot of people who were on my course at uni who started literally the same way. They just had a bit of a hobby, a bit of an interest doing videos using Windows Movie Maker on their mum's family computer, you know. But I think my origin story was when I had one of those. I think I was, I don't know, like 14. I got my first mobile phone, and it was a Sony Ericsson back in 2006 or whatever. And it had a little video editor on it. It was extremely basic, but it had, you could have 5 clips. You could have a text clip, a picture, or a video, and you can have 5 of them and you can string them. And I just found that was fascinating. So suddenly I was able to actually edit things. I could film something and edit it. And, you know, I really regret not having those files anymore, because I'd love to just look at how awful they were just to see how far I've come. But out of uni, so I was on the same course as you, sound and video technology. And it's essentially broadcasting. That's what I always, you know, explain to people. It's a course that was at Media City. So we had the BBC, ITV are on the doorstep. And what a lot of people do is, you know, they bang on the door looking for internships. I didn't do that. I was shadowing someone who had a production company, and I think we were interviewing people at this event, at this, like, I don't know if it was a networking or like an awards night, something like that. It was in Manchester. And I met someone who I thought was quite interesting, and they said, oh, if you want to learn more about my business and what I do, you know, come down to the office. So I did that. And this person, you know, was the founder and CEO of this company. And we just kept on good terms, kept chatting every now and then. I'd literally just started uni. So then it came to the end of my second year, and it was a case of, well, this company needed someone to do video production in-house. It was a tech company. So it depends how you define industry. It wasn't the industry as such, because I think we were looking for jobs in broadcast. You know, as I say, next door to our university was BBC and ITV. But this was a job that paid me to make videos. And at the time, that was unbelievable. That's like the dream. You know, I don't have to work in a shop or in a bar anymore. I can quit that. I can do this. So that's what I did. I began working for this tech company, establishing video production. I was a novice. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was learning on the job, and I was given that opportunity and the flexibility and the freedom. Not free reign. I couldn't do whatever I wanted, but I was allowed to do it in my own style, learn, and I guess there was a bit of pressure to learn and to figure it out, because no one else was going to do it for me. So I suppose that's how I started. And then the itch to go freelance was ever growing. We had the COVID pandemic, so luckily I didn't go freelance before that happened, because I nearly did. But then when things stabilised again, by the beginning of 2023, last year, I went freelance, and that was it. So I started doing my own thing. But I was always doing a bit of my own thing on the side anyway, because you have to start from somewhere. You have to build up a bit of a client base. By accident, I fell into it. There was a client that a friend of mine knew, who recommended me, knowing that I make videos. And from that, I just thought, well, you know what? Okay, I'll go down and I'll film this thing they want, and they paid me for it. And I'm still working with that first client today. So that's kind of how I started. But what about you, Henry? Because obviously we had similar origins, being at the same uni, but different stories, different paths.
So going back to the beginning, I didn't want to be in video. Not that I didn't want to be in video.
To be honest, I think no one wants to be in video. I think it's a very stressful. I mean, I'm feeling the pressure just being on the front of the camera for the first
being
time.
on
but
video, yeah, no.
yeah, it's a very different thing.
But no, I didn't necessarily want to be in video production or in maybe in television or in film production, but not actually operating the camera. I wanted to be a sound engineer or a music producer or a live sound engineer or something in audio. I had my grandfather was a BBC sound engineer, and growing up, I used to help him set up PA systems. And that spiraled into working in theatre as a sound runner. I then went to college and studied music technology. All the while I was doing sound. I was starting to get into video a little bit. My brother and I together got a GoPro. And in fact, the first real video we made was an unboxing video of that GoPro. And it exists somewhere out on the internet.
So you weren't even using that camera then to make that video. That was the subject matter.
So I think we borrowed my mum's iPad to film that unboxing video.
Right.
From there, I then took it. I was in the Air Cadets when I was younger, and I used to take it when we went flying. I'd make little videos of flying, and I first sort of got to grips with editing of video, with loads of little clips from a flying trip. I then went to Jordan on a hiking expedition with the cadets, and I took my GoPro and I made a little film of that with sort of lots of time lapses, lots of stuff just showing what we got up to out there. And that really turned into a sort of a hobby of making videos, making films. When I was looking at universities to go to, I knew I wanted to go to university. I knew I wanted to study in that sort of university atmosphere. And when I was looking at courses, my great uncle, who was a Radio 2 producer and has worked in TV all of his life, or most of his life, suggested looking at courses that cover both sound and video. And that was because if you go into something like sound for TV or just sound in general, understanding video helps as well, just as if you go into video, understanding sound helps. So he suggested have a look at some courses that cover both. And so I came across sound and video technology at Salford University and ultimately went there, and I met you there. When I got there, I found lots of people who were really good at sound, really good at music production. And I realized actually I'm not very good at music production. I'm okay at sound, but I'm not great. I can do the job, but there's better people out there. But what I found when I got there was a really passionate video lecturer. And I found it so interesting and found his passion came across so well. And I found I had a knack for it. I picked it up really quickly. And I found I was actually a little bit better at video than I was at sound. And that was really the turning point for me. And at the end of first year, I had my first freelance job where I went and made a film about a rug cleaning company. We borrowed a load of uni equipment. I think we filmed this video on a Blackmagic Cinema camera in 4K RAW, which why on earth we decided to go with 4K RAW for this video.
Really not necessary.
It wasn't, but it looked great. It looked amazing. We spent the entire budget. I mean, the budget was, I think, about 75 quid, but we spent the entire budget just getting ourselves there because neither of us had a car. But it was my first job, and it was my first sort of introduction to working in professional video. And from then, it grew and grew. So at second year, third year, I was freelancing during my summers. I was freelancing constantly. Then when I got to the end of my degree, I was looking at master's courses. I was contemplating doing masters, contemplating going into freelance, going into the industry. And I came across a course at the uni called documentary production. And I thought, well, it looks interesting. And by that point, I'd made a few sort of documentaries as coursework. And a lot of my freelance work was interview-led content. So it was telling a story through an interview with cutaways, either in a corporate atmosphere or sometimes in a more narrative-friendly atmosphere. And I thought, well, this documentary course might be beneficial. It might help me to look at my corporate work with more of a factual narrative approach, telling a story, rather than just getting across the key information. So I went and did this master's, and while I was doing the master's, I started to look at how documentaries and factual narratives could be used by brands to tell stories. And so for my final project, I made a series of films. In fact, I made a film about yourself, Marcus, in your old car.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, back when you had a Porsche.
Yeah, it was an old Porsche, and we could have done with giving it a bit of a wash before we started filming it.
Possibly.
Yeah. But I'm glad that you had a good time filming it.
But yeah, so I made a series of films about Porsche. They were sort of spec films about Porsche, but about the people that Porsche represented. So, for example, Marcus, who drove his Porsche.
Yeah, I drive a Volvo now, just making it clear and sensible. I've learned from my mistakes.
But yeah, so after I'd finished my master's, I started applying for jobs. I was doing a little bit of freelancing. Thankfully, I got a job just before COVID hit. I got a job with a production company, and I started learning how production companies run and how they operate and how you work with clients on things that are bigger than just sort of single person shooting. Thankfully, I was there when COVID hit, so I was furloughed. But while we were coming out of lockdown, while the restrictions were starting to ease, you could go out, you could go and do things, I started working as a freelancer with a school and producing a lot of content to create virtual open days. So we did a tour of the school, we did videos sort of talking about each of the subjects that you could do, and that really started growing my freelance portfolio and my freelance clientele. I carried on doing that for a little bit, and then it came around to June 2021, and I was taking a lot of time off of work, using up a lot of my annual leave to go and do freelance work. And it just got to a point where I was going to run out of holiday, and I was going to run out of time to freelance. So really, the time to go freelance was then. Thankfully, I'd lined up enough so that my first day of freelancing officially was when we set off to film Ambitious 220, but we'll get onto that in a bit. But I went straight into working full time, and that really grew and grew and grew, thanks to sort of word of mouth. I did one job that recommended me to another. I then started working in sport, and I did a film about a footballer that then led to more films about footballers, which led to films about cricketers, and that really grew my sort of sporting portfolio. And all of a sudden, I was a sports videographer, I was a sports video producer, which again, like I said earlier, I wasn't very sporty when I was a kid.
Yeah, you didn't really expect that to be the route that you took.
No, not at all. And then we did Ambitious 220, and that led to more cycling content and working with ultra distance athlete and producing cycling content. And then I started working in golf, and I worked for a tech startup in golf, and it really wasn't where I expected to be, but I am telling interesting stories, and I get to tell interesting stories, and that's where it just so happens that all of these stories are in sport, and it's really interesting I've ended up here. While I was freelancing, I worked with you a lot, and vice versa, and we worked well together. We worked together at uni, and we had a few projects at uni together. But then, sort of early 2021, we started discussing a potential project to work on together, which Ambitious 220 didn't really start out as we're going to make a feature-length documentary.
It was never meant to be a feature-length film. For those of you who've not seen it, and to be honest, I reckon most of you haven't seen it, Ambitious 220, you absolutely should. Ambitious 220 is essentially a story of four guys who go on a long-distance ultra cycling adventure.
220 miles in 24 hours.
Yeah, that's right. So how that came about was a friend of mine, Mark, who I've known for a long time, he came to me saying, look, me and my friend Gaz, we've been on a bit of a a bit of a challenge, a bit of a ride. We've done 3 days of cycling. To be honest with you, I forget the distance, but they'd filmed a bit of footage and they wanted to, have it edited into something. And that's, they know that I can do that. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do some editing for you. So I did some editing and they were like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I think a year later, they were doing the next big challenge. And it was this 220-mile ride from Scotland down to Manchester. And it was going to be 220 miles within about 20 hours, something like that. And it was to raise money for the charity which is about autism. And they said, could you film a portion of the ride? Could you film some of it? Maybe just like the Lake District section as we come down.
You came to me and said,
we need to do something big with this.
Well, no, originally you came to me sort of suggesting, oh yeah, we're probably going to meet them in the Lake District, film them a little bit in the Lake District, make a little short sort of fun video of them, which then sort of turned into, okay, well, we can meet them in the Lake District and then film them going all the way down to Manchester. And then I'm not quite sure where the turning point was, but at some point...
I think you just realise, well, why don't we just... how much more is it to just go to the start, and do the whole thing? So we just did the whole thing. Didn't we? The route changed.
The route did change.
Yeah, due to, COVID and all the rest of it. I'm looking forward to the days when we don't have to mention the pandemic, but we're still there. Due to the COVID restrictions imposed by Nicola Sturgeon at the time, we couldn't go from Scotland to Manchester. There was a travel ban. So it was Newcastle, Carlisle, and then down to Manchester, coast to coast. So we just kind of thought, well, it's not that much further to get to South Shields and Newcastle. We'll just do the whole thing. So we did the whole thing. And it turned into this, quite emotional story. Both of us feel attached to it because we were there for the whole length of the adventure, same as the riders. We weren't in the, we weren't cycling. We weren't doing strenuous exercise, but just the fatigue. And I remember a point just outside of Chorley and Bolton where I think we were getting a bit tired and we'd lost all focus and somehow still able to drive the camera car and just getting a bit tetchy with each other, because it's not a huge car. There was 4 of us with all the kit.
I think by that point, I'd driven us, and I was driving most of the way, and I'd driven us from Manchester up to Newcastle, across to Carlisle, and then back down that big triangle. And there were so many occasions throughout that shoot where I wanted to get sort of a few minutes sleep, a few minutes kit.
Oh God! Yeah.
And in fact, actually, there was one moment where I said, right, I reckon they're about an hour away. So we sat down, and I started to close my eyes, and as just through my squinted eyes, I saw some flashing lights in the distance, and I thought, no, it can't be them.
Yeah,
it can't be them.
It was them.
It was them.
It was 3 a.m. It was somewhere along Hadrian's Wall. I can't exactly remember where, but yeah, just ridiculous. They had a really good tailwind and they just caught up to us. Yeah. But that's the thing though. So that whole story, that whole project didn't, we didn't earn any money from that at all. Whereas we do this for a living. This is our job to make these films. But yet this didn't pay any of our bills or anything. It cost us money to make, and yet it was the most fun and the most, I don't know how to say, value that I've felt from my work.
Ambitious 220 is, I think, why we call ourselves filmmakers.
Absolutely.
Because it was a passion project at heart. It wasn't for a client. It was in association a little bit with Rafa, in association with Ambitious about autism. But at the end of the day, it was a passion project. It was our decision to say, okay, we're going to make a feature out of this. We're going to follow the whole ride. We're going to go with the team, just to say thanks to Chris and to Josh as well, who were our additional crew, as well as Johnny and Ricardo, who also cycled the route, and Jess, who did the graphics for us. It was a passion project, and it was filmmaking, and it wasn't content production, it wasn't social video production, YouTube production.
Absolutely
it
not.
went out on YouTube, but It was filmmaking.
And it was,
for the purpose of making a film.
and it's the most content I've felt for, well, in recent memory, to be quite honest. It was just fun, and I want to get back to that. I want to have a whole hallway full of framed posters of films that we've made, and we will get there. It just takes time and a bit of dedication, but we'll get there.
As freelancers, and freelancing as a whole and running your own business comes with its difficulties. Marcus, what's the biggest struggles you face as a freelancer?
Cash flow. So having a steady income, I mean, it's weird. It's like the grass is always greener, okay? So when I was working full-time, that was great for a while, but eventually I decided, you know, this isn't enough for me, I need to learn more, and I know that a lot of the people that I aspire to be in my career have spent a good amount of their time freelancing. And you get a variety, so, you know, it was very appealing to go freelance, so I thought, right, I'll do that, but you give up the regular income, you give up the predictability, but you gain freedom, and that's fine, but there's an inherent sense of guilt unless you're really busy, or at least this is how I feel. You know, I don't always make the most of, let's say I'm working on a shoot and I've got the whole weekend busy and I'm working, and then on a, you know, Wednesday, I'm free, I've done all my work, I'm good. I don't relax because I'm looking for the next job. So yeah, you know, I've shifted my weekend from being Saturday, Sunday to being maybe a Wednesday, Thursday on this particular week, but I don't feel good about it. So that's one thing I'm struggling with, as well as just settling into that, you know, regular income. It helps that one of my clients does a retainer, which is really, really helpful. I don't know how long that's going to last for. All depends on how the project does. But before that, yeah, it was quite a bit of a struggle. And also getting paid on time, because you do a project, say in January, takes a while for feedback to get signed off by the client, which means you don't end up sending the invoice until February. So you end up getting paid at the end of those 30 days. So you're already 5 or 6 weeks in since you've, you know, done the job to getting paid, but then they forget, and then you send an email, and then it's another 30 days. So, you know, and then it builds up. So I'm still settling into that. I'm still getting used to that. I'm still trying to build up a bit of a float, a bank of, you know, cash that I can survive on if there's a dip in being paid. But then you end up spending the money on kit because you see a good deal, or, you know, there's a nice lens over there.
An FX3 up for sale for a reasonable price.
A very reasonable price. And you think, you know, I've been waiting for a year for this. This is the time. Even though it's not the right time for me, it's the right time because it's quite a bit cheaper because there's an offer going or a deal or something. So you end up, but you've got to, you know, make those decisions, and it's business. And I tell you something, through these difficulties, I'm learning a lot, and I know that I'm not alone in feeling this way. I know that through talking to other freelancers, you know, cash flow and being paid on time is a challenge. But we all knew that. We all signed up to that when we started. So it's a challenge, but, you know, you gradually get better at it.
For me, as well as cash flow, there's almost two big problems I find with freelancing. One is using up my time. I try and keep a balance of working 5 days a week and keep my weekends clear. But as a freelancer, when I'm sat doing nothing on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, and I'm thinking, this is time where, because I'm not working, I'm not earning money, I could be working, I could be earning monne.
Yeah,
but I feel guilty for not booking in that time.
It's a whole mindset shift. More money.
Yeah, and I think there's a struggle there. I feel like I've got better at it, but in previous years I've worked flat out 7 days a week. I've edited on Christmas Day, I've edited on New Year's Eve. I've put in as much time as I possibly can because I felt that if I wasn't working, I wasn't making money, and I felt guilty for myself.
But if you were working a full-time job and getting paid regardless, you wouldn't feel that way, would you?
Exactly.
You'd love it if the boss gave you, oh, you can go home early today or something like that. But when you do that for yourself, which if you do your work and it's a Friday and it's 3 p.m. and you've got all your edits sent off, surely you should be able to enjoy that well-earned evening, that early afternoon off.
But that 2 hours could be spent trying to find more work.
Yeah.
And that's the thought that goes through my head and goes through a lot of freelancers' heads of, if you have time to sit still and do nothing, you have time to go and find more work.
You know, it's funny though, because they also say a creative needs time to do nothing, because that's how you can recharge creatively and be creative. But I don't know, when you've got bills to pay, and it's all on you, yeah, it's difficult. So that is definitely a big challenge.
And also, as a freelancer and as a self-employed, as a business owner, you're doing the job itself. But you've got to be a salesperson. You've got to sell yourself. And I find it a bit awkward at times, selling myself and saying, I'm the bee's knees, I'm the best thing since sliced bread.
Well, we're British, we're reserved naturally.
Exactly. I'm not comfortable, I'm not always comfortable saying, and I'm not always comfortable selling myself. And that's something that I'd love to learn more about and learn how I can sell myself.
I do benefit from doing a lot of conferences, and during those conferences, you know, you interview a lot of people to produce, you know, well, content that promotes the conference for future years. You know, you ask people, oh, how's it going? Are you enjoying it? Are you having a good time? So naturally, you end up just in conversation. So that's good for, you know, that's helped me learn how to sell myself, because obviously people naturally ask, well, you're filming this, what else do you do? You know, must be fascinating. You know, you're filming stuff and all of that. You know, people, what we do is actually quite interesting, but yeah, just taking that leap to talk about it is quite difficult actually. I've got a friend of mine who he builds dry stone walls for a living, you know, and that's really cool. I find that really interesting, but to him, that's just the everyday. That's just what he does. And I work with cameras. That's just what I do. So, you know, perhaps we don't appreciate how interesting it actually can be. And yeah, we should find ways to be more confident to sell ourselves more.
But at the end of the days, when you're powering through these struggles, Marcus, what is it that keeps you going, that keeps you passionate about your job?
I think it's the times where you know you've done a good edit. For me, I mean, obviously this podcast is aimed at lots of different creatives, but in the, you know, realm of video, which is what we do, yeah, when you've sent off a draft of a first draft of an edit, and it comes back, and there's no major changes, it definitely feels nice.
That's definitely satisfying when you get an edit back and there's no revisions, and they're like, "Yeah, we love it."
It's like,
I was like,
"What? What, are you sure?
Do you not want any changes?
I can do this. I mean,
sure?
Yeah.
What I love about my job is meeting new people, meeting interesting people. And when I get to interview someone who has an amazing story and is incredibly passionate about what they do, that's really what drives me to come back the next day. Some days, I have days, and I have had times in my career where I've either missed out on jobs, or a particular edit's been really stressful, or I've just had tough times, and I've contemplated giving up. I've contemplated selling all my kit, going and working on a farm or something like that. But then I go and interview someone who's passionate about what they do, and that just reignites the flame in my passion. And all of a sudden I'm back to normal. I'm back to, this is why I do what I do. Yeah. So there may be people watching, there may be people listening to this podcast who perhaps are looking for a career change, or perhaps they're students, or they're just youngsters who want to get into media, into video. What's your piece of advice for getting into video production, doing what you do?
So really, you can only give advice based on your own experience. So my experience was to essentially work a normal job, but then, you know, to obviously afford to buy the kit. because the kit's expensive, and that can be a barrier. You will hear people say, oh, the best camera that you've got, it might be your phone, whatever it is, use that. And that is absolutely true. You should definitely do that because you need to be using, you need to be shooting, you need to be practicing, because there's a nuance to it. You know, the more videos you edit, you find better ways of doing it. There was a time when I didn't use industry standard software. You know, I used to use Sony Vegas to edit my videos with, and it was.
I remember you using Sony Vegas well into uni, and wondering why aren't you
exactly.
changing to Premiere?
It was a real. I had to really push myself and to forget about the stubbornness and actually, you know, get over that hump and learn a new skill and learn. And it's paid its dividends, you know. But the reality is, you've got to pay the bills as well. So, you know, I mentioned, you know, giving advice from experience. My experience was working a full-time job where I was then able to, luckily, reduce my hours a little bit so that I could still afford my bills, but it gave me a couple days a week to find the freelance work. And the reason why I did that, instead of just quit my job cold turkey and go for it, it took me 2 months to find my first paying bit of work when I decided to go freelance and, you know, actually have a go of it. So I was very lucky that I had a full-time job that allowed me to reduce my hours. You might be working in a bar or in a shop or doing shift work. And if that's the case, then it might be a bit easier for you to be able to reduce your hours, but obviously you still need to pay the bills. So it all depends on how much you want it. And, you know, I'm no guru, I'm no expert. I've not made it yet. I'm still on this journey, and that's why we're doing this podcast. But that's my experience. So that would be my advice. Really ask yourself how much you want it. Ask yourself what you've got access to today, and, you know, start small. And don't quit the day job straight away, because you might need it just for those couple months to give yourself time to get started. And what about you, Henry?
Well, I always say, if you want to be a filmmaker, you need to make films. If you want to get into filmmaking, you want to get into video production, you need to be making videos. And I'm not saying that you need to be getting paying clients from day one. I'm saying that you need to practice. And even if that means borrowing your mum's iPad to film an unboxing video of a GoPro, if you have your own camera, that's great. Or if you can borrow one from school, or if you can borrow one from uni or your college or somewhere like that, go and make a film. Go and make something interesting, whether that's a short story you've written that you've turned into a film, or go and film your friend's band, your brother's band, playing some music, make a music video. If you've got, I don't know, a parent or an uncle or aunt or someone like that who runs a business, go and interview them. Or even someone interesting who has an interesting hobby. Go and film an interview with them, ask them who they are, what they do, and why they're passionate about it. Film them doing their job for a little bit and piece something together that tells their story. And all of a sudden, you have a portfolio piece. And the more and more of those that you do, the better. You can build out your portfolio, and then you can make a show reel out of all of those little clips. And then eventually, either you'll be noticed by someone who needs video and is willing to pay you. If you have a family member who runs a business or a friend who runs a business, you can go to them and say, this is what I've made in my spare time. Can I make some videos for you? And yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that from day one you need to go in charging thousands and thousands, maybe ask for expenses to start with, but appreciate that it's going to take time, but you will grow if you put in the effort and you practice it.
I think it's proving that you can do the work as well. And a lot of what we did, well, whilst at uni was that, but I want to throw back to 2019. You've got to be opportunistic. Okay, so a friend of mine, he thought to himself, well, you know, I can go down to Mercedes and I can do a 48-hour test drive over a weekend. He brought the car up to the lakes, and I think me and you, we said we wanted to try out a few camera techniques and filming, and I believe this was the first time that we properly did something out of the boot, or one of the early times.
Yeah.
those clips are still on my show reel today, you know.
Mine too.
Yeah, they're still there. So it might be a case of doing a lot of things for free or being opportunistic and, you know, oh, I've got a friend who's got a nice car, or, you know, maybe my dad's hiring a car for the weekend and it's quite nice, maybe I can do something. You need to be able to look for opportunity to put the sort of stuff on your show reel that you want to do for work.
Well, I think this comes down to the idea that if the opportunities aren't there for you, make the opportunities.
Yeah, you've got to really be entrepreneurial with it a little bit.
If you want to make car videos like we do, and like we did at the time of making that, go and make car videos. Go and focus your practice on making car videos. If you want to make sport videos, if you want to make football videos, rugby videos, cricket videos, go and make videos about that and build up your portfolio and your show reel with that sort of content. Because then when you start applying for jobs and applying to companies or pitching to companies for freelance work in those particular industries, they'll see, oh, you've got loads of cricket work, loads of racing work, loads of fashion work, loads of textiles, loads of music work. And they'll immediately see, okay, you understand what we do and your passion aligns with our passions.
All you then need is a little bit of luck and hopefully you'll get there. There's no surefire way, but you have to create opportunities for you. And it'll take you shorter or longer than someone else. You know, no one's equal, but, you know, they always say with time and persistence you'll get there. So it must be true.
So to wrap up each of our episodes, we want to feature a Q&A, particularly with our guest that week, but also with ourselves. We know a lot of stuff too, but if we don't know the answer to your question, we're not going to try and come up with an answer and try and give you sort of an answer that may or may not be true. What we're going to do is we're going to go and find an expert who understands that particular question and get their response and give you a proper answer that hopefully helps with your career progression. We hope you enjoyed listening to us. And if you have enjoyed listening to us, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, a like, something like that. And yeah,
we'll see you for the next one.
Next one.